Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to peel back the curtain on one of the absolute most fascinating areas of modern science. We are going to completely demystify what brain scans are actually telling us about who we are and how we think. So if you've ever seen one of those brightly colored pictures of a brain in a news article and thought, wait, what does that actually mean? Well, you are in exactly the right place. I mean, it's a question that feels ripped straight out of a science fiction novel, right? Can neuroscientists actually read your mind? We see all these incredible technological leaps, and it is so deeply tempting to believe that scientists can just peer into our heads, watch our thoughts unfold in real time, and decode our deepest secrets just by looking at a computer screen. It's a hugely common pop science myth. But the reality? Well, it's far more intricate and, frankly, a whole lot more interesting. For example, this brightly lit, glowing brain image probably looks super familiar to you. I mean, it is everywhere in the media. Whenever there's a new psychological study, you'll see a picture just like this, usually paired with some wild headline promising that scientists have finally found the exact area for love, or the area for religion, or, the area for financial risk-taking. It essentially presents the brain as this simple machine with a bunch of neat little on and off switches. So, Section 1, the mind-reading illusion, breaking down the brain myth. Okay, let's really dive into this because the reality of cognitive neuroscience is just so much more complex than what those glowing pictures suggest. Have you ever heard the term blobology? It's this rather unflattering term some scientists use to describe the trap of over-interpreting brain scans. It happens when researchers, or let's be honest, more often the media, falsely assume that one specific isolated brain area, a little colored blob on a scan, completely controls one highly complex human thought. But the brain just doesn't work by assigning one complex emotion to one tiny isolated piece of real estate. Just look at the contrast here. On one hand, we have the mind, this incredibly elusive, intricate network of cognitive states, memories, and consciousness. On the other hand, we have the physiological brain. Cognitive neuroscientists accept that there is massive functional integration in the brain. Complex thoughts are not just isolated little modules, they are the result of highly coordinated activities spanning across vast networks of the entire brain. It's like a giant dynamic puzzle. Moving on to Section 2, watching the brain think. What scanners actually see? So if we aren't just looking for glowing blobs, what are we doing? How do we actually measure the brain? Well, machines like fMRI scanners aren't directly measuring your thoughts at all. They're actually measuring physiological processes, specifically blood flow and oxygen use, which act as a sort of proxy for neural activity. And here is a truly mind-blowing fact: 5%. When you're put in a scanner and asked to perform a really heavy cognitive task, like solving a complex math problem, the increased blood flow typically adds less than 5% to your brain's baseline resting activity. Your brain is literally always on, burning massive amounts of energy just to maintain its intrinsic networks, even when you're just staring blankly at a wall. And because that signal change is so tiny, we really have to acknowledge the limits of the scanner. Historically, a lot of fMRI studies have been super underpowered, sometimes using fewer than 20 participants. And that can lead to false positives and create this really deceptive illusion of selective activation. Plus, let's be real for a second. Lying perfectly still on your back inside a noisy, claustrophobic, dark tube doesn't exactly mimic everyday life, does it? We call this poor ecological validity. In fact, studies show that your memory performance is often significantly worse inside a scanner simply because it's such an anxiety-inducing and unnatural environment. Which brings us to Section 3, the causation trap, when things happen at the same time. So the crucial point is this: we are facing the absolute biggest hurdle in cognitive neuroscience, and it's called the causation trap. We have to critically evaluate whether changes in physiological brain activity actually explain cognitive processes or if they merely accompany them. This is the fundamental difference between correlation and causation. Just because a specific brain region lights up at the exact same time you experience a thought, that's just a correlation. It's accompanying the behavior. It absolutely does not automatically mean that brain region is causing or explaining the thought itself. To put that into perspective, picture this. Imagine standing in the middle of a really busy plaza. Let's call it Alexander Square. You look to your left and see your science teacher walking out of a bakery. At the exact same second, you look to your right and see your math teacher pop open an umbrella. They happened at the exact same time. They're correlated. But did the science teacher buying a croissant cause the math teacher to open the umbrella? No way. It's the same in the brain. Just because a region activates when you do a task, it doesn't mean it generated that task. And this whole correlation issue gets even messier when we actually design lab experiments. When scientists try to hunt down the neural correlates of consciousness, basically the brain activity linked to you being aware of something, it is unbelievably complicated. Why? Well, because to know you're aware, a scientist has to ask you to do something like press a button. But pressing a button isn't just consciousness. It requires selective attention, holding instructions in your working memory, planning a motor movement, and then physically moving your finger. All of those extra steps light up the brain and completely confound the data, hiding the true signal we're actually looking for. Section 4. Proving cause and effect. Moving beyond the correlation trap. So if scanners mostly just give us correlations and pushing buttons muddies the waters, how do neuroscientists ever actually prove cause and effect? Well, to prove a brain area is truly necessary for a function, that it actually causes the behavior, scientists have to play detective. They have to perturb it. They temporarily disrupt a brain area using safe techniques like transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS, or they study patients who have localized brain lesions. If you temporarily knock out a specific brain region and the person suddenly cannot perform a specific task, bam, then you have strong evidence of causation, not just some coincidental correlation. And this leads us to a really profound realization from researcher Trevor Harley. He notes, our language and thought may not divide up in the way in which the brain implements these processes. Just think about that for a second. We humans invented concepts like working memory, attention, and love, and we like to neatly pack them into little psychological boxes. But the brain? It's a biological organ shaped by millions of years of evolution. It doesn't care about our human-made categories. Its biological wiring might execute processes in a completely alien way compared to how we describe them in a textbook. All right, Section 5, Summary, the real brain. Let's put all these pieces together. Okay, we've covered a massive amount of ground in this explainer, looking way past those glowing pop science pictures and getting into the rigorous, sometimes really messy reality of neuroscience. So let's rapidly summarize the core takeaways so you can walk out of here a highly savvy consumer of science news. First, always remember that fMRI mostly shows correlational associations. It accompanies behavior, it does not automatically prove direct cause. Second, ditch the blobology. The brain works through massive functional integration across huge networks. Third, remember those button press confounds. Behavior lab tasks naturally muddy the data with extra cognitive baggage. And finally, if an article claims a brain area causes a behavior, check if they actually physically perturbed the brain to prove it. Which leaves us with this final, beautiful mystery. If our scanners are really mostly just watching the physiological blood flow shadows of our thoughts, how will we ever truly capture the mind itself? It is a giant puzzle, and a challenge that's going to keep neuroscientists, philosophers, and curious minds like yours engaged for decades to come. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking those brilliant questions, and I will catch you next time.